At 7:59 p.m., this neighborhood looks like paradise. Manicured lawns, warm porch lights, the smell of someone's dinner drifting through an open window, a sprinkler ticking lazily across a driveway that's never seen a single crack. 60 seconds later, it becomes a tomb. You can hear before you understand it. A synchronized mechanical roar, steel shutters slamming down over every window on the street, one after another, like a hell breath finally released. The street lights flicker twice, then they die. In this community, the curfew isn't a rule, it's a survival tactic. And tonight, we're going to find out what happens to the people who don't make it inside in time. Imagine you're driving in for the first time. The community is called Renfield Hollow, though you won't find that name on any county map made after 2003. GPS, routes around it. Realtors describe it in hushed, careful language. An established, close-knit enclave. A neighborhood that takes privacy seriously. What they don't say, not in the listing, not in the open house, is a thing every current resident already knows by heart. Everyone is inside by 8. No exceptions. You'd think a rule like that would feel oppressive. It doesn't. Not at first. It feels almost quaint. The kind of old-fashioned discipline that makes a place feel safer, more orderly. Porch lights click on around 7:30 like clockwork. Children are called in from the yard. Dogs are walked early. There's a rhythm to Renfield Hollow that most modern neighborhoods lost decades ago. And if you're the kind of person drawn to community, to belonging, to the comforting hum of shared ritual, you might find yourself charmed before you find yourself afraid. That's how it was for Marguerite Aldis. She moved into Renfield Hollow 11 months ago, into a pale yellow house at the end of Thistlewood Court. Following a divorce that had left her craving exactly this kind of quiet, she was told about the curfew during her final walkthrough, delivered by the listing agent in the same breezy tone you'd used to mention trash pickup days. Oh, and everyone's usually indoors by 8. It's just sort of a neighborhood thing. A neighborhood thing. She laughed about it at the time. Told her sister it sounded like something out of an old church town. All curtains and casseroles, and everybody minding everybody's business. She didn't think about the shutters, thick, reinforced steel, bolted into every window frame. Painted the same cheerful cream as the siding, so they blend in during the day. She didn't think about why a residential street would need infrastructure like that. She didn't think about it because nobody talks about it. Not directly. Not ever. For the first few months, Marguerite followed the rule the way you follow any rule you don't understand yet dutifully without question, the way you stop at a red light, even on an empty road at 3 a.m. She'd come inside around 7:45, pour a glass of wine, and watch through her window as the street performed its nightly ritual. Garage doors sliding shut, porch lights snapping off in sequence, house by house, like dominoes. And then, right at 8, that sound, the shutters, every single one, all 41 houses on the court, sealing at almost exactly the same moment. A metallic groan, a heavy clunk, and then nothing. No street lights, no porch lights, no sound at all, except if you listen closely. And Marguerite did more and more as the months went on. Something that might have been wind. Except there was never any wind in Renfield Hollow after dark. She told herself it was just an old, eccentric HOA rule, a holdover from some past era of paranoia. Maybe a string of burglaries decades ago. Maybe an overzealous board president who liked control. Communities develop strange rituals all the time. This one just happened to be a little stranger than most. She was wrong. And it would take her exactly one broken curfew to understand how wrong. It happened on a Tuesday in October, the kind of gold-lit evening that makes you forget the years dying. Marguerite had gone to visit a friend 2 towns over. Nothing dramatic, just dinner, just wine, just the ordinary friction of traffic on the drive home. She left with what she thought was plenty of time. She didn't account for the accident on Route 9, the 20-minute crawl behind flashing lights, the slow creep of her phone clock ticking past 7:40, then 7:50. At 7:56, she turned onto the road leading into Renfield Hollow, and she felt something she couldn't name yet, a tightness behind her ribs, unrelated to the traffic, unrelated to being late for anything as mundane as dinner plans. At 7:58, she saw the gate, The community gate, usually open, decorative, more suggestion than barrier, was closing. Slowly, deliberately, on some automated timer she'd never noticed before. She pressed the accelerator. The gate kept moving. She made it through with maybe 4 feet to spare, tires screeching against the crushed granite of the entrance drive. And in the rearview mirror, she watched the gate seal shut behind her with a heaviness that didn't match its size. Not a decorative click. A vault door. She didn't have time to think about that, because ahead of her, the street was already changing. Porch lights, one by one, extinguishing, not flickering. Extinguishing, like something reaching out and pinching each flame between 2 fingers. She could see her neighbor's silhouettes in windows, moving with a speed and urgency that had nothing casual left in it. Mrs. Okafor at number 14, practically running to drag her cat inside by the scruff. The Whitfield twins at number 22, being yanked through their front door by their father, who didn't even glance back to close it. The door swung shut on its own, some pneumatic mechanism she'd never noticed doing the work for him. Marguerite's house was 6 doors down. 6 houses she needed to pass before she reached her own driveway. At 7:59, she heard the first shutter fall, a distant metallic slam from somewhere behind her, house number 1 sealing itself off from the evening. Then another closer now, a rolling wave of sound moving down the street in perfect sequence, like a line of dominoes falling in reverse, chasing her toward her own front door. She would tell you, later, much later, in a version of the story she'd only share once, that in that final stretch of driveway, in those last 8 or 9 seconds before 8 o'clock struck, she felt watched in a way she'd never felt watched before. Not by a person, not by a camera, something wider, something patient. She threw herself through her front door at 7:59 and 41 seconds. Her own shutter slammed down 4 seconds later, plunging her house into total darkness. The kind so complete it felt less like an absence of light, and more like a presence of something else. She sat on her kitchen floor for 11 minutes before she trusted her legs to stand. And that would have been the end of it. A scare, a lesson learned, a story to tell at dinner parties about that time she almost missed curfew in her weird new neighborhood. Except for one detail that wouldn't leave her alone. Someone hadn't made it. The next morning, Renfield Hollow looked exactly like it always did. Sprinklers ticking, joggers waving from across the street. The particular, aggressive cheerfulness of a place that has decided, collectively, not to acknowledge something. But there was a car in the Ferraro driveway at number 31 that hadn't moved, and there were 2 police cruisers parked outside it. Lights off, no sirens, nothing that would draw attention. As if even emergency response in Renfield Hollow had learned to be quiet. Marguerite asked her next-door neighbor, a soft-spoken retired teacher named Dale, what had happened. Dale's face did something complicated. A flicker of real fear, quickly folded away and replaced with the community's practiced blankness. Roger didn't make it in, he said. Just that, for words, delivered the way you'd mention a mild inconvenience, a delayed flight, a canceled appointment. Didn't make it in from where? Marguerite asked. Dale looked at her for a long moment. The way you look at someone who's asked a question they're not ready to hear the answer to. He was working late. Traffic, probably. A pause. It happens. Not often, but it happens. Is he? Marguerite started, and Dale cut her off gently, but with finality that closed the conversation like a door. The Hollow takes care of things. You want to let the shutters down early tonight, just to be safe. Nice to see you, Marguerite. He walked away before she could ask another question, and she stood in her driveway for a long time, watching the 2 quiet cruisers and the house at number 31 with its curtains drawn against the daylight that suddenly felt very thin. Over the following days, she tried to find out more and ran headfirst into something she hadn't expected. Not hostility, exactly, but kind of soft, communal deflection, practiced by everyone with the fluency of people who had done this many times before. She asked the mail carrier. He suddenly had somewhere else to be. She asked at the small grocery on the edge of the community. The cashier rang up her items in silence and told her to have a nice day, twice, with a bright, brittle smile. She asked the HOA office directly and was told politely that resident matters are confidential and that the curfew existed for community safety per long-standing covenant, and that she really needn't worry as long as she followed the guidelines. Nobody said Roger Ferraro's name again. Not once. It was as if the community had a shared, unspoken agreement. You could reference what happened in the vaguest terms, but you could never actually name the person it happened to, as if naming him might summon whatever had. Might have done what exactly? Nobody would say that either. Marguerite began to notice something else, too. Once she started paying attention. The way every house had a small brass plaque near the front door, so subtle she'd never registered before, engraved with single word, sealed alongside a date. Not the date the house was built. The date, she would later learn, was the date each house had last needed to be resealed, meaning the date something had gotten close enough to require it. Her own house had a plaque too. She'd never noticed it. The date on it was 11 years old. Whatever this was, it had been going on for a very long time, and Renfield Hollow had gotten very, very good at pretending it hadn't. Marguerite was not, by nature, someone who let a locked door stay locked. It was, if she was honest, part why her marriage had ended. An inability to leave a question unanswered, a compulsion to keep pulling threads long after everyone around her had agreed to stop. So she drove to the county archive, 40 minutes away, in a squat brick building that smelled like dust and old paper, and she asked the archivist, a patient older man named Grissom, for anything on Renfield Hollow. He raised his eyebrows. "That's an unusual one," he said. "Don't get many requests for that." What he pulled for her, over the course of 2 visits, painted a picture that made her hands go cold even in the overheated reading room. Before it was Renfield Hollow, the land had been something else entirely, a research annex, built in the early 1960s, officially classified in surviving documents only as Site 14, Restricted Atmospheric Study. The public paperwork was vague to the point of uselessness, the way documents get when someone has spent decades quietly scrubbing them. But Grissom had something better than public paperwork. He had donated personal collections. Boxes left the archive by families with no one left to claim them. .1 box belonged to a woman named Eleanor Voss, whose husband had worked at Site 14 as a night security supervisor. Her journal, water damaged but legible, described something the official records never would. She wrote about the presence that arrived with the dark, not gradually, but suddenly, as if the switching off of the sun were also a switch being thrown somewhere else. She wrote about hearing it before her husband ever admitted to seeing it, a low, layered sound, like wind moving through something that isn't there to be moved through. She wrote that the facility's night shift dwindled from 12 men to 4 within 18 months. Not through resignation, but through disappearance. Quiet ones, the kind that got explained away in local papers as transfers, relocations, family emergencies. And she wrote, in an entry dated just months before the facility's abrupt, unexplained closure in 1968, about the shutters. Bertrand, her husband, believed the new steel panels they just installed weren't meant to keep anything out at all. Quite the opposite. He thought whatever moved through Site 14 at night was testing something simple than a wall. Testing whether the people inside would choose, over and over, not to let it through. In his telling, the shutters were never a barrier. They were a decision, repeated nightly, to keep a door closed. Grissom couldn't tell her what happened after that entry. The journal ended there. Eleanor Voss herself was listed in a single follow-up article as having relocated in 1969. There was no further record of her anywhere ever again. But the facility's land didn't stay empty. In 1974, a private developer, records showed a shell company with no public officers, quietly purchased a parcel and began construction on a planned residential community using, according to permitting documents Grissom found buried in a separate file, the existing perimeter infrastructure, a phrase that meant nothing to a county clerk in 1974 and meant everything to Marguerite now. The shutters had never been new. They'd been repurposed, upgraded, over the decades, house by house, but built on a design older than any of the residents currently sleeping behind them. Whatever Site 14 had been studying, whatever had arrived when the lights went down over that stretch of land, hadn't left when the facility closed. It had simply been rehoused. There's a specific kind of fear that doesn't make you run. It makes you still. It makes you want to see. Marguerite told herself it was journalistic instinct, or grief for a neighbor she'd never met, or just the same stubbornness that had walked her into that archive in the first place. Whatever it was, 3 weeks after finding Eleanor Voss's journal, she made a decision that everyone in Renfield Hollow would have told her, in hushed and horrified voices, never to make. She wasn't going to seal her shutters all the way. Not open. She wasn't reckless, not entirely. But she rigged a narrow gap, no more than 2 inches, at the base of her bedroom window, using a folded strip of wood to stop the mechanism from fully engaging. Just enough to see, just enough to hear. At 7:58 that evening, she turned off every light in her house and sat on the floor beneath the window, phone camera angled to the gap, her pulse a physical thing in her throat. At 8 o'clock, the street died the way it always did. Shutters, silence, dark, for the first 11 minutes. She checked her phone obsessively. Nothing happened. Just an ordinary, empty street under a moon that seemed dimmer than it should have been, as though something were filtering the light before it reached the ground. Except it wasn't wind. Marguerite would spend the rest of her life trying to describe it more precisely and never quite managing it. It was a movement of air, yes, but directional in a way wind never is, flowing down the center of the street like something walking, without the shape of anything that walks. The trees didn't rustle. The grass didn't bend. Only the air itself seemed to fold and unfold, over and over, tracing a slow path from the sealed gate at the entrance of the community, down Thistlewood Court, house by house. And it was listening. She didn't know how she knew that, only that she did, the way you know a room has another person in it before you've turned around. It paused outside the Whitfields at number 22 for nearly 90 seconds, she counted, because count was the only thing keeping her hands from shaking too badly to hold the phone. And in that pause, she heard something that might have been a voice, if a voice could be built from wind moving through a keyhole. Not words, not quite, but shape, intention, the texture of language without any of its content, like a phone call from a room 3 walls away. It moved on, house by house. Testing, she would think later, remembering what Eleanor Voss's husband had believed. At 8:41, it reached her house. She has never, in any retelling, been able to fully explain what those next 4 minutes were like. The gap in her shutter, barely 2 inches, became the only fact in the universe. She said the air outside seemed to press toward it, not violently, but with a patience that was somehow worse than violence. She said she heard, very close now, that same almost voice, and this time she understood, without understanding how, that it wasn't trying to force its way in, it was asking permission. And she understood, with a clarity that felt like ice watered down her spine, exactly why every house in Renfield Hollow sealed itself completely every single night, without exception, because the shutters weren't a lock. Bertrand Voss had been right. Decades before Marguerite was ever born, the shutter wasn't a wall keeping something out. It was a boundary the residents chose not to cross every night, and the thing outside respected that choice completely, unless you left it a gap, unless you gave an opening, unless you answered. Here's the thing about a gap of 2 inches. It is not a door, but it is, apparently, a question. And the thing moving down Thistlewood Court that night had been asking the same question at every house for longer than Renfield Hollow had existed as a neighborhood. Longer, even, than Site 14 had existed as a facility. It had been asking it, patiently, for as long as anyone had lived on that land at all. "May I come in?" Marguerite yanked the strip of wood free at 8:44 p.m., and her shutter slammed the rest of the way down with violence that cracked the frame. The presence outside, if presence is even the right word for something that seemed to be made entirely of intention, paused for exactly 3 seconds outside her window. Then it moved on, unhurried, down toward the end of the court, and did not return. She sat on her floor until dawn. The next day, she went back to Dale's front porch, and this time he didn't send her away. Maybe it was the look on her face. Maybe 11 years of practiced silence finally had somewhere to go. He told her about Roger Ferraro, the truth, or as close to it as anyone in Renfield Hollow allowed themselves to say out loud. Roger hadn't been late because of traffic on Route 9. He'd been late because 3 months earlier, his marriage had been falling apart, and he started staying out later and later. Some nights barely making the gate, some nights, Dale admitted, voice dropping, leaving a window unlatched on purpose. Just to feel something happen, I think, the way people do reckless things when they're already broken inside. On the night he didn't make it home, Dale said his neighbors heard his front door standing wide open at 8:04 p.m. Nobody went to check. Nobody ever goes to check. That is the community's oldest and grimmest rule, older even than the curfew itself. Once the shutters fall, no door opens again until morning. For any reason, no matter what you hear. In the morning, Roger's house was empty, not ransacked, not disturbed, empty, in the specific and terrible way of a house whose occupant simply isn't it anymore and never will be again. The police who came were the same 2 quiet cruisers Marguerite had seen, men who, Dale said, had been called to Renfield Hollow before and who filed the same kind of report every time. Voluntary relocation. No evidence of foul play. Case closed. There have been, by Dale's careful count, 11 such reports in the community's 50-year history. 11 names nobody says. 11 brass plaques, dated, polished, mounted quietly by doors where new families move in every few years without asking too many questions, because the listing agent tells them, in the same breezy tone every time, that it's just a neighborhood thing. Why does everyone stay? Marguerite asked him, why doesn't everyone just leave? Dale was quiet for a long moment. Because it doesn't follow you, he finally said. Whatever it is, it belongs to this land, to this street. As long as you're behind steel by 8 o'clock, it's just weather. It's just a sound outside a window. You go anywhere else in the world, you never think about it again. He looked at his own front door. The trouble is, once you've lived here long enough to understand what it is, most people find they'd rather keep the devil they know. Marguerite didn't sleep for 3 nights after that conversation. She thought about leaving, packing the pale yellow house on Thistlewood Court into a moving truck, and driving until Renfield Hollow was nothing but a strange chapter she told at parties, half believed even by herself. She thought about it seriously enough to call a realtor. But she also thought about Eleanor Voss's journal and the quiet 50-year machine of denial that had swallowed 11 names without a ripple, and she found, to her own surprise, that leaving felt less like an escape and more like becoming one more brass plaque in someone else's silence. So she stayed, not because Renfield Hollow was safe. It isn't, not entirely, not ever, but because she'd learned something in that gap of 2 inches that she couldn't unlearn. The thing outside the shutters isn't hunting. It isn't malicious. Not in the way a monster in a story is malicious. It is old and patient, and it has been asking the same quiet question for longer than any resident's lifetime, and will keep asking forever to anyone who leaves an opening. The tragedy of Renfield Hollow was never really about a monster. It was about grief and loneliness and every small, human moment when someone decided, like Roger Ferraro did, in his broken, unspoken way, that being taken by someone might hurt less than being ignored by everyone else. Marguerite still lives at the end of Thistlewood Court. Her shutters seal completely every night at 8 o'clock exactly. She has never left the gap again, but she started something none of her neighbors expected. A small note slid under new residents' doors during their first week, before the HOA's breezy version of the rules can settle in and calcify into the same practiced silence. It does explain everything. It doesn't mention Site 14 or Eleanor Voss or the 11 names nobody says. It says only this, sealed completely every night without exception. If you hear something asking to come in, you already know the answer. And if you're ever the one who wants to leave the gap open on purpose on your worst night, please call someone first. Call anyone. You're not as alone here as the silence makes you feel. Nobody has left the gap since. Not yet, anyway. At 7:59 p.m., Renfield Hollow still looks like paradise. The lawns are still green. The porch lights still click on in their careful, practiced rhythm. Somewhere, a family is finishing dinner, and a dog is being called in from a yard that will be sealed shut within the hour. The way has been sealed every single night for 50 years, and the way will be sealed for 50 more. If you ever find yourself driving past a community like this, gates a little too heavy, shutters a little too thick, a silence that settles just a bit too completely once the sun goes down, You might not think anything of it. Most people don't. But if you ever hear, in the space just outside your window, something that sounds almost like wind, almost like a voice, almost like a question, you already know the answer. Seal it shut, and don't open it again until morning. If this story kept you up a little longer than you meant to stay, that's exactly what the Narrative Vault is here for. Subscribe and turn on notifications so the next quiet, patient thing we uncover finds its way to you before the lights go out. Good night, and check your locks.